911 because you're probably getting into the heat stroke category.
Yeah, this is the silent killer, right? So even if the weather is great and you're seeing plenty of sunshine, you still got to stay in tune with it with that intense heat and humidity. Victor White, Fire Division Chief for the Miami-Dade Fire Department. Thank you for your time here tonight on Fox Weather.
Well, check out this sunrise over New Bedford, Massachusetts. Just stunning over the water, the boats, the marina. Like a scene from a movie. However, later on in the day, not so picturesque. They ended the night more on the dreary side, with rain kind of plaguing that area for eastern Mass for at least the next couple of days. The reason behind this training storm effect for eastern Massachusetts is this low storms for eastern Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island as well. And then that low finally starts to slide a little bit farther off to the south, giving this area a much needed break. However, on Friday, we have another round that does begin to come in and will make its way to I-95 for the middle part of our Saturday afternoon. So this weekend isn't completely rain-free, so at least keep that in mind with any weekend plans you have moving forward. For the next 3 days, notice rain will be a feature for all northeastern cities, whether that be every single day this week or just sporadic rain showers. That's kind of more what we're looking at, but still enough to maybe annoy a couple folks if you have any outdoor plans. The rain still to come through Saturday. All of this rain you're seeing here near Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, that is going to be from Wednesday and into Thursday. The later part of the weekend is where we're starting to see all of this rain come in, and around 1 inch is what you can expect. As you head farther south towards the mid-Atlantic and Appalachia, that's when we could see 1 to 2 inches, and locally maybe 2 to 3. But it's been a soggy start to 2024, with Providence, Rhode Island having their second wettest start, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, their first wettest on record. And we're tracking a Kona low that's bringing flooding towards Hawaii. And this is something we typically see in the winter months, so it is unusual to have it follow us into late spring. Now, what is a Kona low, you might ask? What are all these terms that us meteorologists keep throwing at you? Let me go ahead and break it down. A Kona low is a low pressure system that sits just off to the west of the Hawaiian Islands. This then shifts that wind pattern and brings the winds from the south and pulling in more of that tropical moisture, leading to heavy rain, strong winds, and significant flooding in some cases. And as I pointed out, it typically occurs in the winter, from fall to early spring. April is usually when we start to see these events die down, and yet we're in the middle part of May and one's impacting the Hawaiian Islands right now. The way the setup is sitting over the last 12 hours, here's that low pressure and here's the Hawaiian Islands. We have some of that moisture being pulled in, but that will only be on the increase as we head throughout the next couple of days. That copious moisture is being pulled from the tropics, and all of that moisture available to then condense down into torrential downpours. And with the Hawaiian Islands, I haven't been so fortunate to go and visit, but it is on my bucket list. But you see the mountainous terrain and how beautiful it can be. But in the valleys with these mountains, that's when you can start to see the rain really begin to build up and the flooding impacts increase. With the risk of flooding, we do have the flood watches in place through Friday, but I wouldn't be surprised if we continued those into the weekend, as well as the rain still will linger for the western islands like Honolulu and Kauai, I believe, or Kauai. You might have to kind of bear with me with these names. They kind of stumble me a bit. But the future radar here just showing you the rain is going to be persistent through Thursday, into Friday, and into Saturday. So if you have any Hawaiian vacation plans, unfortunately, maybe not the best week to do so. The system should wrap up by next week, but not without dropping quite a bit of rain. Honolulu, 3 to 5 inches expected towards the city of Honolulu and near Highway 1 and Highway 2. As you get to the northern part of the island near Kawila Bay, that's when we're looking at 1 to 2 inches of rain from the event. And you're looking at evacuation traffic as wildfires move in on Fort McMurray and Alberta Providence in Canada. We'll show you how this will affect us here in the U.S. right after your regional forecast. You're watching Fox Weather at Night. Thanks for sticking with us. welcome back. We're taking you to this scene out of Fort McMurray in Canada as they had to evacuate ahead of the advancing wildfires. This video was taken at 1:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday. However, it's looking as dark as dusk and a little apocalyptic, if you ask me, almost like something from a movie. The wildfires are quickly burning roughly 1.1 million acres in Canada so far. However, Alberta and British Columbia are the two provinces that have been hit the hardest. In total, we're looking at 45 active fires for Canada, but it still pales in comparison to what 2023 looked like as skies turned orange not only for Canada, but for the U.S. It makes sense, though, why we are seeing fires erupt in the far western provinces, as that is where we are seeing the most extreme and exceptional drought. You have these dry fuels that are very easily combustible. And that's what we'll look at moving forward for the United States. Areas that are susceptible to fires being ones that are in extreme to exceptional drought. And yes, we do have some of those spots in the U.S. We did have quite a bit of smoke, actually, from the Canadian wildfires make their way into the upper Midwest, with Ian Leonard over from Fox Minneapolis saying that folks were smelling a campfire when they walked outside early on this week. The atmosphere does work its magic and will mix out a lot of this quite quickly, but where the wind is coming from will dictate if more smoke piles into the same areas. So for people that do have upper respiratory problems, this smoke will be an issue. So you need to make sure that you check in on your air quality and make sure you are aware if there are any air quality alerts in your area, which we've already seen this week. The acres burned in Canada so far, 45.7 million. That was back in 2023. This year, we are looking at 4.4 million acres. So we are nowhere near where we were at in 2023, and forecasters and researchers are saying we shouldn't reach 2023 criteria. But it does have a lot of folks a little weary of this wildfire season, which will last until October for Canada. Now, we are based in the U.S., so I have to hit on what wildfire season has been like for the United States, and we are looking at 1.8 million acres burned so far. Now, while that might seem like a huge number, we had one outlier wildfire that just wreaked havoc across the panhandle of Oklahoma and primarily Texas. This impacted an area such as Smokehouse Creek. That's why it was named the Smokehouse Creek Fire, where it burned 1 million acres and by far was the largest wildfire in Texas state history. As far as drought in the United States, we do have quite a bit in the Four Corners region, which is a concern because that's where we have been seeing the fire weather alerts and the outlooks pop up over this year so far. But we also have some drought up into the upper Midwest and into the Corn Belt. Even a little bit of drought still lingering from Mississippi and portions of Louisiana. So a lot of areas that we'll have to watch out for as we head into the long, hot summer that's expected to be ahead. And a place that could use more rain and moisture is southern Texas. Crops have taken a major hit, and some farmers are even forced to destroy last year's sugarcane crop due to the lack of rainfall. Farmer and owner of the England Cattle Company, Michael England, joined America's Weather Center with an update on this year's crop yields.
You know, the sad part about it is we can have rain right here locally where we are, but as all irrigated farmers, where we really need the water is in our dams, meaning Falcon Dam and Lake Amistad. And we've just had no inflows. England Farms, you know, we've only got just a few of our acres planted this year, and it's just a big gamble that we've taken of even planting those. We did catch a rain the other day. It's a blessing, you know, it'll kind of help those. But in most of these pictures that you're looking at of corn and grain sorghum, it's too late. I mean, they're already done what they are. Yeah. You mentioned the sugar mill. You're right. We're the only sugar producing area in the state, and it recently closed, and it's a devastation because you're laid off. You potentially 500 workers lost their jobs.
That many. That's unbelievable. So, Mike, you talk about the rain. Is that the only place you guys get water from? It's just pure rain dropping from the clouds?
No, sir. Our main water source in our area of the Rio Grande Valley is out of the Rio Grande River, and which is also an international boundary with Mexico. It's water that is shared by Mexico via the 1944 treaty that was written. And that water is pumped out of the river. It goes to various water districts spread out across the valley. And then we receive, through pipelines and canals, we receive water to each field. But as of right now, all of that water has been taken away from us and only for municipal use.
Oh, man. So let me ask you this. Has it been like this for a long period of time, or just a couple of years ago you were doing all right? Is it a steady drop-off?
No, in fact, our weather patterns have been changing over a number of years. In 2002, 2008, again in 2011, which, by the way, 2011 trumped the 1955 drought as far as statistics are concerned. But then here we are back in a severe drought again, year number 3 into it. Our water has been cut back over the last 3 years, and but this is the worst I've ever seen, where we've basically had zero water to work with.
That's unbelievable. So what kind of water do you need? I mean, do you just need constant days and days of rain, or is it just too late for the season?
Rain is, to us irrigated farmers, we don't just need rain. We need irrigation water and then rain to fill in between the irrigations.
Yeah, I got you. So what are your, you've got a little bit of land left. What are you doing with the land that is actually farmable?
This year, out of the potential of 2,500 acres of cotton, I've got 500 acres planted. I've got 120 acres of grain sorghum planted, and I just told myself if it doesn't make grain, I'll make hay out of it for our cattle operation.
Right.
But all the rest of the land is just sitting there idle.
So what do you think the future is going to be for you guys? Are you gonna just change into a different kind of farming?
It's hard to do in our area. Being irrigated and the type of land it is, it's not like some of the dryland areas that are to the northwest and northeast of us. This type of land you can't really dry land. Some of it you can if it's real sandy, but our heavier land, it's not dryland land. It won't produce.
Oh, I understand. Well, Michael England, we wish you luck here at Fox Weather for sure. Thanks for taking the time out and talking to us, because yeah, it's interesting stuff. I had no idea it was that dire of a situation in South Texas. We appreciate your time, Michael. Thank you.
We're just a few weeks away from the Atlantic hurricane season, and just 3 years after Hurricane Ida rocked Manville, New Jersey, the scars from the storm are still in the area. A new documentary aims to shed light on the plight of Manville and the impacts that severe weather has had on the town and its roughly 11,000 residents. Joe DeVito, producer and director for the film The Asbestos City, joined Fox Weather earlier to share his thoughts.
I think this town is doomed, to tell you the truth. Yeah. I think it's doomed.
The flooding that the town has encountered over time has significantly worsened.
The floods and the threats of floods and getting worse and worse all the time.
September 2nd of last year, besides losing my mother, was the worst day of my life.
So let's bring in Joe DeVito, producer and director for that film. It's called The Asbestos City. Joe is also a Manville resident, so a member of the town council and a teacher at the nearby Immaculata High School. And so, I mean, you're very in tune with all of this. Joe, thank you for being with us. This was such a powerful film, and I know I just summarized part of that story, but tell me more about Manville and that issue the town faces when it comes to flooding.
Well, thank you, Steve, very much for having me. Manville is a blue-collar community, a lot of history here. It seems to me that this is an issue that the entire region is facing. And you see, Manville is located at the point at which the Raritan and the Millstone River meet. We're nestled in the crux of those two rivers. So when it does rain, we are always on edge. And really, if you take the 10,000 foot or 30,000 foot view, as you know, this is a regional problem, and it's a big problem. And it seems like the state and federal governments don't really want to get their hands dirty. So this is what I wanted to show in this film. I wanted to give a voice to these people, because this is a human issue. It's quite devastating, and people are still homeless to this day because of this past flood.
Yeah, flooding is one of those events that you don't come back from in weeks, months. It takes years to rebuild out of that event, and it can all happen again if you don't make any changes to the landscape there or try, like you had said, to get the governments involved. And that's what I want to ask you about. Some of those residents, they've actually accepted the buyouts from Blue Acre. That's a state program that acquires flood-prone land. Others decided to raise their homes to mitigate the flooding problems. But back in 2016, the Army Corps of Engineers said the possible flood control measures in the town don't meet the federal government's benefit cost requirements. Like you had said, they don't want to get their hands dirty. So effectively telling residents, guess what? You're just going to be on your own. So what, if anything, can they do to prepare for the next storm?
Well, really, I think that the point of this film should be to call attention to this fact, but also the fact that we need to get people talking. There needs to be some sort of regional flood commission. We want the residents to make their voices heard and really come together to bring awareness to this problem. There needs to be better stormwater management, I think really is the bottom line. And, it's a multi-layered problem because you have a lot of towns that they're following their ordinances and their rules. But the problem is that the impervious cover, even, in the past 50 years, I mean, if you look at the topographical maps, you'll see it's just exponential impervious cover over the past 50 years. So there's nowhere for the water to go. And the stormwater management it's essentially outdated. So it needs to be updated, and we need to keep up with all of this building that's going on because all the water ends up coming into people's homes and devastating their lives. It's a quality of life issue.
Feeling this vibe, dial 305-209-2017. Yo. Yeah, this your boy Lifeo. Keep it locked in. It don't stop. North, south, east, and west, stand up.
And today marks the official start of Pacific hurricane season. So we wanted to talk preparedness. And what better way than to evaluate past storms and see how we can learn from them? GeoTrek extreme weather and disaster scientist Dr. Hal Needham joined Fox Weather First to share his insight.
This storm just rapidly intensified and blew up. It intensified by more than 90 miles an hour in just 15 hours, going from a tropical storm to a Cat 5 hurricane, taking everybody on the ground by surprise.
So what was it like for locals? Because, I mean, after this happened, to be quite honest, the first thing that came to my mind was what would happen if this happened in America? What if this was Pensacola, Florida, for example, a Gulf of Mexico hurricane? Obviously, there were warnings sent out. That was clarified by Mexico. But when you talk to people in Acapulco, did they feel like they had that last-minute warning, or did they literally wake up and they're like, what is going on?
I think almost everyone I talked to was just taken completely by surprise, really for two reasons. The history of hurricanes in that region, when they thought of hurricanes, they mostly experienced heavy rain events with mudslides and flooding. They had never seen a wind event anywhere near this intense. But that said, this was not well forecast, and I think the rapid intensification surprised everybody, even forecasters, but they had never seen anything like this, and were certainly not expecting this type of wind. The winds just shredded a lot of these high-rises. We often think if you could get to an interior room in a building, you'll be safe. In a lot of cases, entire floors of high-rises were just completely gutted. All that was left was the elevator shaft. So just complete devastation, and I think very few people were expecting this.
Lessons learned. When we look at the video and the pictures that you captured right after being there with Otis, you talked about these structures, and a lot of them were built to withstand earthquakes. The winds, I think, were a big part of this, because the higher up you went, the winds were just whipping out a lot of these windows, but the center portion was okay. Do you think lessons are learned moving forward with building codes in this part of the country or in this type of situation?
Oh, for sure. Well, Craig, like you said, in this part of the world, a lot of people are building for earthquakes where you want the buildings to give and have sway. With a hurricane, that's not what you want. So they were really taken off guard. They weren't really built for this. But that said, I saw a lot of cases where there were adjacent buildings side by side where one performed really well and the one next to it is just completely gutted. So it taught me really how we build matters, and that we can build to prepare for anything, even Category 5 hurricane winds.
And of course, we're talking about a Pacific hurricane, but rapid intensification is something that has a huge impact in America, in the Atlantic Basin. I think most systems that go through the Gulf of Mexico undergo rapid intensification. And although it's been a while, I mean, our last Category 5 hurricane was Michael back in 2018, but that storm was impressive, destructive, devastating. When it's been that long, you know, we're talking 6 years since our country has dealt with something like that. How can we take the lessons that we learned from Otis, not only structurally, but forecast-wise, and apply that for folks that live here in America that are looking at, you know, our next Michael?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember being on the ground in Mexico Beach the night before Michael struck, and Michael also rapidly intensifying by 45 miles an hour in that last 24 hours before landfall. So that, again, a lot of people weren't prepared for that. It jumped up from a Cat 2 to a Cat 5 real quick. And I think that's part of the story. Over the past 7 years, we've seen 6 landfalling hurricanes in the Gulf that just blew up right before landfall. And I think one of the take-home lessons is we need to be prepared for shorter timelines to respond to these hurricanes. We often assume that we have 48 or 72 or 96 hours to put into play our evacuation plans and make our preparations. In cases like Mike.
Typically, tropical activity in the eastern Pacific is suppressed in a La Nina year. But with all of the above-average warmth in the Atlantic, well, we might be in some action there, too. Louisiana State University Associate Professor Jill Trepanier joined Fox Weather and Weather Command to break it all down.
Thanks for having me. I will do my best to try to explain this. So I'll start in the Pacific because that's where the ENSO phenomenon is. It's this idea of a switch between an El Nino, which is what we were in last summer, where the equatorial Pacific gets nice and hot, and then into a neutral or kind of middle ground where you think of it as what the normal state of affairs is, and then into a La Nina, which is what we're expecting, about a 70% chance by September that we'll be in a La Nina throughout the equatorial Pacific. What that does for the Pacific is it increases the amount of cold water that pools over the Pacific Ocean. But what that does for the Atlantic is it allows what I like to think of as the choppiness of the upper atmosphere, or what we call wind shear, how the wind flows in different directions. It causes everything to flow generally in the same direction, which is bad for those of us that live in the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the United States and throughout the Caribbean and Mexico, because those storms then have a conducive environment where they're able to grow and organize, as opposed to getting, in a manner of speaking, ripped apart by wind shear. So with the switch into this likely La Nina phase, we will be able to see more storms organize into a more symmetric and kind of classical hurricane look, which then, of course, leads to typically higher intensities.
If only it was as simple as we've got El Nino, we've got La Nina, this is how it should act. But weather doesn't like to be in a box. It is multifaceted, and as you know, sea surface temperatures have been and played a huge role in last season. We had an incredibly active season in the Atlantic, one of the busiest that we've ever seen, and it was supposed to be quiet. Now we go into La Nina, and as you showed us, we anticipate it to be busy, but we also know that the water temperatures are running quite high. When you talk about all these factors coming in, it can make you dizzy. But what are you thinking, when you talk to people, I'm sure, how do we weigh it all? What are we focusing on?
So I appreciate that question and the way that you frame that. I like to think of the entire atmospheric ocean component as this massive puzzle. And so I often talk about different puzzle pieces, and the El Nino or ENSO status is one of those puzzle pieces that we think of as a foundational background to what we need to occur in order to actually produce storms. The sea surface temperature and ocean temperatures that are incredibly hot, as you mentioned already this sort of season hasn't even started yet. But this increase in ocean temperatures is yet another puzzle piece, and it helps to support, once a storm is there, it helps to manifest that energy transfer. The more energy or additional heat that we have on the ocean surface, the more we can transfer that into the atmosphere through evaporative processes, and then with that make big old clouds through massive condensation processes. So it's this big energy transfer between the ocean and the atmosphere. The ENSO helps to support the actual growth of the storms themselves, but that ocean temperature is what helps to additionally drive the intensification. And you mentioned, or you all mentioned, this idea of frequency versus intensity, or this idea of tracking versus intensity. With sea surface temperature, it plays much more a role in the intensity signature of a storm and less so in the tracking. And that's why we're able to track a little more easily these foundational frameworks. But then when we think of the additional puzzle pieces that do lead to some dizzying way of thinking about what's going to happen, warm ocean temperatures, all else being equal, will lead to higher intensity storms. That's what the research supports. And so we have this breeding ground for very impressive storms this season. And so I am hopeful, as always, that we will have a quiet season. Not only does it save lives, but it also makes our world a little less wild here in South Louisiana. But we also, need to think of that framework and those puzzle pieces. And this season, all signs point to a pretty active one.
It's certainly the case, and there's plenty to talk about, too. Wish we had some more time, but we got to go. LSU Associate Professor Jill Trepagna, thank you for joining us this morning on Weather Command. We'll continue this conversation, have you back on in the season. Let's hope that Louisiana can weather the storms well.
Thanks very much.
Year.
Have a great day.
Well, with all of the talk about the tropics, we have to break down what we are already starting to see in the Eastern Pacific. We're showing you video that came from just last year from the two impactful storms, Otis and Hillary. Will we see a repeat? Well, we have a long way to go, although May 15th did mark the first day of hurricane season for the Eastern Pacific, so we are right there, folks. We do have a potential disturbance that is churning near the ITCZ just off the coast of Central America and Mexico. It's now just towards the south of Acapulco, an area that got hit the hardest by Otis last year. At this point, the potential disturbance is given a 40% chance of developing into something, and that's actually an increase as opposed to what we were tracking just the last couple of days. Very small increase from 30% to 40%, but still it's something, showing you that the atmosphere is a little more conducive. Now, the way that the atmosphere is shaping up, it's going to carry the storm if it does form farther out towards the west-northwest, so no impact to land. But it is a sign that we do have life being breathed back into for the Pacific and even the Atlantic as the Atlantic hurricane season starts in 2 weeks. This is historic Hurricane Otis, historic because of the rapid intensification, going from a low-end hurricane to a massive Category 5 in just 24 hours, catching a lot of people off the coast of Mexico off guard. But we have to jump to the Atlantic Basin, and in 2024, these are some of the names that we are probably going to get really familiar with. Hopefully we don't make it as far south as to get to William, but Alberto, Beryl, Chris, and Debbie, they're certainly going to be coming in the next few months. The key here is the main development region, which is the water off the coast of Africa as it moves across the Atlantic Ocean. Right now, the temperatures are sitting in the upper 70s, and we need it to get to 80 degrees to support that tropical development. So we're close, but not quite there just yet. While June 1st does mark the first day officially of hurricane season, it's actually September 10th that marks the peak where we see the most tropical activity because the waters have been just so warm over the course of the summer, and then that activity does start to drop off as we head in towards November. We have been tracking some Saharan dust that's starting to dissipate, but it's that dust that can hinder tropical development. So while the Pacific is up and at 'em, the Atlantic is right behind. And the Carolinas, just the latest to battle severe storms as the South tries to catch its breath. Flash flooding and severe weather threats continue into the weekend. We'll break it all down for you coming up next. This is Fox Weather at Night.